Biden, you want to take the high road? Call up Kathy Hochul. Have her give a pardon. You could do that.
President Biden should pardon Donald Trump of any and all crimes.
So much of my frustration in coverage here is how people who are upset about things forgive those same things in Trump. It is a very strange thing. So you want Biden to do something that Trump would never do, but that's because, Trump is just such a jerk. You can't hold him to that standard.
A number of prominent Republicans, Fox News hosts, and other conservative commentators are publicly calling for President Biden and New York Governor Kathy Hochul to pardon the convicted felon Donald Trump, and we have to talk about it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. All right, friends, reactions from the right wing to Donald Trump's historic criminal conviction have been varied, and we're definitely going to be exploring them intimately. Again, it's a historic situation, and I love basking in right-wing schadenfreude. But one of the strangest responses has been from a number of prominent right-wingers suggesting that President Biden and, again, New York Governor Kathy Hochul should take the moral high ground and pardon Donald Trump, a convicted felon. So we're going to play some of these clips and unpack them together. This first one here is from former Trump press secretary Kayleigh McEnany on the Fox Propaganda Network.
Biden, you want to take the high road? Call up Kathy Hochul. Have her give a pardon. You could do that.
And even, I don't know if you hear that, but Harris Faulkner was like, what a great idea. Harris Faulkner being another Trump sympathizing right-wing co-host. Yeah, really, Joe Biden, if you really want to be a good guy, Joe, if you really want to take the moral high ground, you need to help Donald Trump escape any sort of accountability for his crimes. In the case of the Manhattan election interference case, in which Trump was convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business record to try to steal the 2016 election, the actual convictions, right? You should help Trump escape accountability for those things. But it's not just Kayleigh McEnany, again, a former Trump supporter. You also have Bill O'Reilly, who used to be a legendary Fox News host and frenemy of Jon Stewart. Now he does his own thing. He's a frequent guest on News Nation. Here, O'Reilly, also a Trump supporter, for a much greater length of time, tries to sell Chris Cuomo on the merits of President Biden and Kathy Hochul pardoning Trump. But Chris Cuomo gives it back and makes some pretty good points that O'Reilly doesn't want to deal with.
This is creating even more discord in the United States. Not since the Civil War.
Yeah, I agree. I said it. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
it's exacerbating things.
Not since the Civil War has the citizenry hated each other, and I use that word literally, as much as it does now. It's going to get worse. So now we have bitterness, we have acrimony, we will have violence, that's coming. We have 50% of the country believes the justice system is corrupt. 50, maybe more. Remember, 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. 70 million. So what should happen now, and I wrote this on BillO'Reilly.com, and I steered you to it, but I don't think you went in, is that tomorrow, President Biden should pardon Donald Trump of any and all crimes and suggest publicly that Governor Hochul do the same thing. And then on Saturday, President Biden should pardon his son, Hunter. That would throw the whole acrimonious system into absolute chaos.
We're going to play more of that clip in just a second, but again, I want you to unpack what he's saying. So again, how self-serving here. Now, O'Reilly's cleverer than McEnany, so he tries to throw in basically a bone to Biden. Today, President Biden should pardon Donald Trump. And then tomorrow, he should pardon his son, Hunter, basically to balance the scales. So funny. A couple of things. Number one, President Biden actually took kind of a superhuman act of ethics by committing early on to not pardoning his son, Hunter, his only surviving son. You may recall that President Biden, whether you like him or not, his life has been marred by tragedy. He lost his first wife and his young daughter in a car accident. His eldest son, Beau Biden, died of brain cancer. And Hunter Biden has had a very troubled life. He's Joe Biden's only surviving son, and he has been prosecuted by Biden's own Justice Department. That fact right there is, by the way, probably going to feature in multiple videos in the near future for people who are freaking out about the so-called lack of impartiality from the DOJ. President Biden is allowing the prosecution of his own son to take effect. And he has the power not only to end the prosecution by compelling the special counsel to be fired by Merrick Garland, or he could fire Merrick Garland if Merrick Garland didn't comply, but he could also pardon Hunter Biden. And he could have done it since January 20th, 2021. And not only has he not done it, he's publicly committed to not doing it. But Bill O'Reilly says, listen, 50% of the country voted for Trump. It's not exactly true. And again, actually, Donald Trump, even at the height of his popularity, never enjoyed 50% approval. I digress. But to soothe things over, we really need to pardon him. But again, as you can see here, Cuomo you can see he's visibly tensed because he sees a double standard here, a hypocrisy that he's about to expose.
And there's precedent, as you know, because Gerald Ford did exactly the same thing when Richard Nixon could have been charged in Watergate, and those crimes were 1,000 times worse than what Trump was charged with.
Well,
so
in
that's
this
what
case,
Biden should do.
In this case. But Biden can't. That's why you bring in Governor Hochul. He can't pardon a state case.
Thank
Hochul
you.
could.
But he can say to Hochul, and believe me,
right, you should do
Hochul would do it. You should
Maybe.
do this.
Let's leave out the fact that Trump would never do that. Trump would never do that for an opponent. Well, listen, I can't tell you how much this matters to me.
Totally irrelevant.
But here's why it's relevant, Bill. Okay, here's why it's relevant. So much of my frustration in coverage here is how people who are upset about things forgive those same things in Trump. I'm going to go sit down tomorrow night with a group of people who believe that everything that happened during the COVID pandemic was about some kind of conspiracy. Everybody needs to be burned at the stake except Trump. It is a very strange thing. So you want Biden to do something that Trump would never do, but that's because, Trump is just such a jerk. You can't hold him to that standard. I don't think that that's fair.
Listen, Cuomo, you're obsessed. No, of course it's fair. I'm looking out for the country. I'm not measuring Biden against Trump. I'm telling Biden what's best for the country. Pardon the man.
But you think Trump is best for the country, even though you're saying he's a man who wouldn't do the right thing.
I'm not saying anything. Trump's not involved.
It is. And again, this clip goes on, but good on Cuomo for pushing back. This is also one of my frustrations. It should be one of your frustrations if it's not. We're once again seeing in real time the double standard that the right wing tries to impose on the left, tries to impose on liberals, tries to impose on Democrats, and that they themselves never believe. Did Bill O'Reilly Bill O'Reilly believed that Hillary Clinton, Secretary Clinton, committed crimes and that she was given a pass by the Justice Department? Okay. When Donald Trump was elected as president of the United States he was elected in 2016. He was inaugurated in 2017. At any point, did Bill O'Reilly publicly call on President Trump to pardon Secretary Clinton, his defeated rival, whom many believe committed crimes, to heal the nation? You should pardon Secretary Clinton. You should bring the right and the left together. No, of course he didn't. And of course the right wing didn't do that. The right wing never advocated, even though they believed that Hillary Clinton committed crimes, and even though she was the leader of the Democratic Party at the time, they had no interest in a preemptive pardon to try to heal the country. And that's what Chris Cuomo is talking about. He's saying, you all want President Biden to do something that not only would President Trump never do, you would never expect President Trump to do, and you would never call President Trump to do if the shoe was on the other foot. And we have evidence of that because, again, they didn't do that with Secretary Clinton. As a matter of fact, when Donald Trump was president in 2020, publicly campaigning on jailing his political opponents as a sitting president, we talk about this clip. It's our ultimate Trump card. Trump demanding publicly that Attorney General Merrick Garland prosecute Joe Biden, a political rival, and Barack Obama, an ex-president, a month before the election. Republicans cheered. Republicans celebrated. Where was Bill O'Reilly and Kayleigh McEnany and others saying, you know what, for the sake of the country, ahead of this hotly contested election, Even though we believe Barack Obama, the ex-president, and Joe Biden, the president's rival, committed crimes for the sake of the country, President Trump should pardon them preemptively. That was never proposed. Because again, the right wing doesn't care about this stuff. They just want anything that will save their cult leader, Donald Trump, and Republicans from accountability. Accountability that they would love to impose on Democrats if the merits were there. So again, I love the fact that Cuomo pointed this out because it's a glaring hypocrisy. You see Bill O'Reilly crumble. Well, it doesn't matter. It does matter. And you should be relentlessly reminded of that. And your hypocrisy and your double standards should be exposed, and we should reject them. We'll say, listen, until you start holding Republicans to that same standard, until you start saying, hey, Donald Trump, if you win the presidency, you should immediately on your first act pardon every Democrat that we don't like, that we believe has committed crimes as a stake for national unity, then we're not obligated to take any of your claims seriously on this, because it sure looks like what you really want is Republicans to avoid accountability, but not Democrats. It's not just conservative commentators. You also have Nick LaLota, I think Republican congressman, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, congressman serving New York's District 1. The best way to unwind Alvin Bragg's political prosecution and today's conviction is for Governor Hochul to immediately announce her intention to pardon President Trump and preemptively commute any sentence. To not do so is to allow America to become a banana republic. President Trump's fate in the 2024 presidential election should be decided by voters, not overzealous, politically motivated prosecutors and an imbalanced jury. Of course, Donald Trump's attorney was part of the voir dire and jury selection process. The fact that, he failed, if that's what you believe, that the jury was still unbalanced, that he had his opportunity to balance the jury. And again, where were you all when then President Trump in 2020 was calling for the prosecution of his chief political rival 1 month before the election between them? You were nowhere to be found because you're hypocritical, unprincipled losers who should be relentlessly mocked. Also, you have op-eds about this. Joe Biden should seek a pardon in Trump verdict and prevent disunity, martyrdom, and opinion. This is by a former, this is a Kansas City Star, and this is by a former George W. Bush appointee. So he's Republican. He also makes the case, listen, if President Biden wants to unite the country and cool down temperatures, he should show mercy. He should show grace, even though Donald Trump trashed norms. Democrats, of course, should play by a completely different set of standards. Republicans should never be held accountable for their misdeeds. Super gross stuff. Again, reminder, I love pointing this out, that, again, Donald Trump repeatedly tried to get his political opponents prosecuted as president. Yes, Joe Biden. Yes, Barack Obama, but also Hillary Clinton. It's just that his DOJ refused to comply because they didn't think there was substance there. Donald Trump doesn't get credit for trying to prosecute his political opponents and failing. You don't get credit for that, just like an attempted murderer doesn't get credit for failing in the attempted murder. You still did a bad thing. The fact that you suck at doing the bad thing, that's a different issue. The transgression is still there. But again, the Republicans, they're so thirsty, they're desperate for a weaponized Justice Department, which they had under Trump. It's just, unfortunately, Trump sucked at wielding the weapon. That's what they really want. They cheered it on. They love it. They want it. Last thing I want to play here is a clip from a Nixon and Ford era congresswoman and former prosecutor who actually challenged President Ford after he pardoned Richard Nixon. And she was recently interviewed probably about a year ago by MSNBC. And they asked her about this. Like, what do you think about presidential pardons, Ford pardoning Nixon, and the notion of pardoning Donald Trump? This is what she had to say.
We are hearing from other presidential candidates that if they become president, more than half of them are inclined to pardon Donald Trump without having heard the evidence, by the way. Hopefully they've read the indictment, but they haven't seen any case.
Well, I knew it was wrong at that time, and I knew it would set a terrible example of presidential impunity. I mean, you could just see with what President Ford said at that time that he's switching his argument. First, it was President Nixon suffered enough. Secondly, it's really the country would be distracted by focusing on Nixon and not the problems of the country. I mean, the fact of the matter is he set a terrible example. He short-circuited the process of justice, and he created for the country a sense of a dual system of justice.
Well said. I think it was a colossal mistake in hindsight, pardoning President Nixon. Absolutely, because it just, again, set the notion, the standard of presidential impunity. Listen, presidents are given enormous power and responsibility and also high expectations, and certain accommodations are made to them while they are executing the roles of that office. It makes sense that the OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, will not allow a sitting president to be criminally prosecuted by the federal government, because that would effectively grind the federal government to a halt when the chief executive isn't able to discharge his or her duties. I understand these temporary accommodations, but this idea that if a president, any president, Republican or Democrat, this also applies to President Biden or President Obama or President Clinton, any Democrat and Republican, this idea that those accommodations and considerations stay with them forever and there can be no prospect for accountability, because Nixon was not impeached. There was the threat of impeachment, and he wasn't even convicted because, again, there was no impeachment. It was just the threat of it. Republicans forced Nixon to resign, and then there was the threat of criminal prosecution. And Ford, as she points out, couldn't make his mind up. Well, it's because he suffered enough. Actually, it was for the benefit of the American people. Pick one, man. You say it's one, then you say it's the other. Folks, the powerful have to be held to account. And that's why I'm not concerned when people, and we'll cover this too, Republicans are like, well, we're going to go after Democrats. I have more to say on that. But again, just as a general principle, if you're a powerful person, if you commit crimes, if a case can be made against you by a prosecutor and they think it's a case worth making, then the case should be brought, Democrat or Republican. The law should apply to everybody. And this notion that Trump should be pardoned is ridiculous. And Republicans would never, if the shoe was on the other foot, call for Trump or any Republican to pardon a Democrat. And you can bet on that. Let me know what you think in the comments.